Okay, great. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us, the International Law Society of Rutgers and New York. My name is Deanna. I'm the co-president of the society, and we're very happy to welcome Colonel Linda Murnane with us today to our career panel. So I'll just give a short biography of Colonel Murnane, and then I'll pass the microphone to you. So Colonel Linda Straight Murnane began her career service for nearly 30 years on active duty with the United States Air Force. Colonel Murnane served in a variety of positions, including 10 years as a Chief Circuit Military Judge. She was the Chief Circuit Judge for Europe in the Eastern Judicial Circuit, Bowling AFB, Washington, D.C. She presided at the first criminal trials for the U.S. Air Force during Operations Iraqi and Enduring Freedom in the war zone, deploying 5 times in support of those operations between 2001 and 2003. She has also served as the Senior International Attorney for the Defense Institute of International Legal Studies, training judges, lawyers, and civilian leaders in Liberia, Rwanda, Zambia, Argentina, Latvia, and Papua New Guinea, among other areas, on a wide range of legal topics. Ms. Murnane served as the Chief Court Management and Support Services for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. In that position, she led teams totaling about 40 staff involved in the daily operation of the courtrooms in which the trials of the alleged war criminals are being tried under the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. She was also responsible for leading a team responsible for implementing 3 components of the European Union-funded War Crimes Justice Project. Colonel Murnane served as the Chief Court Management Services Section at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon in Leidschendam, the Netherlands, as well, until her retirement in May 2017. In that position, she was responsible for the electronic filing and evidence systems and the support teams of lawyers and other legal support staff, providing in-court services for the tribunal, which operates in English, French, and Arabic. She was also designated as the independent commissioner for the tribunal, and upon assignment investigates allegations of misconduct involving defense counsel and legal representatives of victims who appear before the tribunal. Ms. Murnane will also talk about a presentation she gave at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences at the Vatican, where she met the Pope. And she is also a co-chair of the ABA section on international human rights. So she has a wide variety of experience in international courts, war crimes tribunals, human rights, and we're very pleased to welcome her. And we very much appreciate her sharing her advice with us. And after Ms. Murnane talks about her experiences in international law, we'll have a bit of Q&A, so anyone is welcome to ask some questions. But first, I'll give the floor to Colonel Murnane.
Thank you so much, Deanna. You're able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Because I didn't want to, waste all this time and be on mute. Find out at the end that I was on mute. So, and just so everybody does know, Deanna is recording this so that for those who aren't able to join us. So I've been warned so that I can be conscious of any questions and answers, and just so that you know that it is being recorded so we can share it later with others. So thank you so much for the invitation to join you today and to share some of the experiences that I've had in the international law arena. I did want to share with you that one of the people that I've worked with during my Air Force career was a Rutgers Law graduate. He actually opted for a more traditional approach, and so he didn't accompany my rather unique journey in the international law arena, but he's really an excellent attorney. So it's a pleasure to speak to all of you from Rutgers. So Deanna and I met through her connection with the International Law section of the American Bar Association. She attended their virtual annual meeting this year. And we actually wound up in a chat room where we were just doing basic introductions. And as a result of that, she said, hey, would you be interested in sharing some insights? And I want to focus today's time together on things that may matter most. And I think what matters most on the minds of most law students is where they're going to work so that they can pay off that student loan debt. And I am going to talk a little bit about that. But I want to talk first a little bit about the path that I took and how I got there. And I'm going to share my screen, I hope. I hope I've done this in a way that I'm able to do it. Yeah. So that wasn't the one I wanted to. I'm going to pause the preview. And hopefully you're seeing now some photos, right? Well, I don't know what happened with that. I don't know where that music came from.
But yeah, we can see the photos.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay, and you're able to see it, right?
Uh-huh.
So by way of background, I came from a family that had decided that it could afford to send 2 of its 4 children to college. And my parents made the decision that they were going to send their sons and not their daughters. They had 2 boys and 2 girls. And so as a result of that, I had to find my own way to pay for both my undergraduate and my law degree. And I did not join the United States Air Force because I was a great patriot. I joined well prior to 9/11 and actually retired during the time that we were responding to 9/11. I enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1974. And in 1974, when women were enlisting in the United States Air Force, they had to surrender their children for adoption before they could come on active duty. They were not allowed to have children, and if they got pregnant while they were on active duty, they were discharged. They were fired from their job and required to exit the service. That rule was not the same for male counterparts who were in the armed forces. It only applied to women. It was a way, however, for me to pay for my college education. And I had 3 years of college when I enlisted that I had obtained by working full-time and going to school full-time at night, or by working full-time at night and going to school full-time during the day. And I paid monthly for my own tuition, room and board, or through grants and scholarships, no student loans. I had no student loans. I went to 5 different undergraduate universities to get my bachelor's degree because of that. And the last year was paid for by the United States Air Force because I enlisted and I qualified for the GI Bill, the military funding for higher education. I went to night law school as a second lieutenant. I had applied for the Air Force's funded legal education program. I was not selected the first round, but I was stationed at the time in Biloxi, Mississippi. And they had a law school that was 100 miles from the base that I was at that offered a night law program. So I commuted 200 miles a night, 4 nights a week after work to get my first year of law school. And that was paid for through the GI Bill. And then I reapplied for the Air Force's funded legal education program the next year and was selected and finished my last year and a half, because I graduated a semester early. I finished my last year and a half through the Air Force's funded legal education program. By that time, and that was, I graduated from law school in 1980, December of 1980. By that time, women were eligible to apply to keep their children and stay on active duty if they got pregnant. I had 2 children born while I was in law school in the 2.5 years that I went to law school. So it wasn't an easy path, but it tells you a little something about, I think, the achievements that you can get to if you just never give up. This photo that I'm sharing with you now is when I was the chief judge in Europe from 2000 to 2003. I can tell you, since I came in as an Airman Basic E1, for those of you who know a little bit about the military, being a full colonel is a very, very long journey away from being an E1. And at this point, I am a full colonel, chief judge in the Eastern Circuit. I had been a an attorney since 1980, and this would have been the year 2001. And I was deployed at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, where I presided at the first trial for US airmen in Operation Iraqi and Enduring Freedom. While I was in law school, I was an international human rights fellow, and I have always been drawn to human rights and international human rights and women's rights, issues related to serving the underprivileged. The first position I had after I got out of the Air Force, I was actually the executive director of the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights, where I was responsible for enforcing civil and human rights violations in 118 counties across Kentucky. I was the executive director and supervised a staff of about 26 folks who took the cases of individuals at no charge who had been the victims of any of the protected classes under Kentucky's civil and human rights statutes. But this is actually my chambers when I was at Al Udeid Air Base. When you go into kind of the unique international law path that I took in the armed forces, you can see I was a judge. I was a judge for 10 years. I was chief judge for 4 years during the time. But I don't think this looks like any courtroom you ever saw or that you will see anywhere in New Jersey. This was my chambers. It was a mosquito netted covered area, and it was outdoors, and it was not air conditioned other than that it was outdoors and in the air. But inside the hangar where my trial was, which is where this building is to my, on the photos left, was actually the courtroom. And I can show you, I think, so one of the things that occurred because of my engagement as a military judge, I became a member of both the American Bar Association Judicial Division and the National Association of Women Judges. This is my sister and I meeting Justice Sandra Day O'Connor at one of those meetings. I felt a great sense of support from the Supreme Court justices with whom I've had an opportunity to interact, and I am admitted before the US Supreme Court. I've never had to argue a case there, but I've appeared on the floor there a couple of times for other matters. But a great deal of support for the US Armed Forces, including not only Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, but later I'll show you a picture of a meeting that I had with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This is actually at a training program that I did in Liberia when I was with the U.S. Defense Institute for International Legal Studies. The Defense Institute for International Legal Studies is the lead entity for rule of law and human rights training associated with military assistance packages that are part of the U.S. foreign diplomacy. There is a requirement under certain provisions that when the U.S. provides military assistance to a country, that a package of training accompanies that to ensure that the training that the weapons that are provided or the systems that are provided are used in a manner consistent with international human rights principles. I was responsible for designing the curriculum, training, and organizing the teams that actually were on the ground training U.S. friends and allies who obtained such military assistance. And this is one of the seminars and one of the teams that I taught in Liberia. And they truly sent me everywhere. This is sunrise at the Rungari National Forest. While I was on active duty with the United States Air Force, I was sent on the first US military assistance team sent to Rwanda following the sanction period following the genocide. And while I was there, I visited 5 of the genocide sites. I also had the opportunity on this particular morning to go to the Rungari National Forest, where I went trekking with the Dian Fossey gorillas in the mist, which was an amazing experience. My experience working in Rwanda was truly life-changing, and I was still on active duty at the time. It was during Operations Iraqi and Enduring Freedom. I was still in Germany at the time, stationed as the chief trial judge for the United States Air Force. It was not a safe time, any of the places that I was being sent to, and including Rwanda. But I was so compelled by what I saw there, and I've chosen not to share with you the very, very graphic images of my site visits at the genocide sites, because for some people it is extremely upsetting. But there were human remains, human bones, still everywhere, skulls as far as you could see lined up on a table. And I was so compelled by what I saw, I called my husband, who was stationed in Italy at the time, was also on active duty. And I said, Kevin, I feel compelled to return here. And that's when I began applying for positions to work for the United Nations at either the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, or which was my preference, or the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And it turned out that none of those applications actually got my foot in the door, but I did wind up working there. And interestingly, the way that I wound up working there was, after I retired from the Air Force, I went to work, as I shared with you, at the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights, doing human and civil rights work. And I received a call one day at my desk from a colleague by the name of Wade Pittman. And he said, hey, Linda, this is Wade, and I'm in The Hague. And how would you like to come to The Hague for 90 days to take over the complex litigation chamber of the War Crimes Tribunal? And I have to tell you that when that happened, I thought for a moment, gosh, I must be like on candid camera or something, because I was like, is somebody like filming this? Because it was like the most incredible, unique question. Yes, I had applied for the better part of 3 years for a position, never gotten a call. And here was The Hague calling me through my former deputy chief judge saying, how would I like to come and take over the complex litigation chamber of the War Crimes Tribunal? And to be candid with you, I didn't even know what that meant. I really, what did that mean, to take over the complex litigation chamber of the War Crimes Tribunal? And I didn't ask that question. I just said, yes, Wade, when do you need me? What day do I need to be there? I didn't ask, like, is there a contract? Will I get paid? Do I have to pay my own way? I didn't ask any of those questions. I just said, yes, Wade, let me call the governor and let him know I'll be away for 90 days, because I worked on the governor's staff in Kentucky. And I said, when do you need me? And 90 days later, I was in The Hague as the senior legal officer for cases involving 6 accused or more, and all of the cases that were being drafted in French. And yes, I was responsible for the delivery of judgments that were being drafted in French. And so you may say, oh, well, she must have been fluent in French. And the answer is not when I got there. But I was fluent in French when I left. Now, I had quite a bit of language training, and by the time I got to the end of my Air Force career, I had studied 4 years of Latin, formal education in Latin. I had studied 7 years of Spanish. I had studied a year of Japanese and a year of German. And for those who have studied foreign languages, you appreciate that you get a general handle on how you learn or conquer a language if you're trying to do that. But French, I had 2 years of high school French when I went to work in The Hague, and I was told I had to draft all of the judgments that were being delivered in French. And to be candid with you, legal French is not the same as conversational French, and all of my French had been conversational French. So I'm sure you're saying, well, how did she do that? How did she do that? Well, I hired a tutor who worked with me 2 nights a week so that we could use the specific kind of vocabulary that I needed to be able to function in my role. And what did I do? Well, I would sit in the deliberations with the judges in the 3 chambers that I supported. And I would sit with them as the senior legal officer and I would listen to their deliberations, and I would take their decisions, their determinations of how a particular issue needed to be resolved, and I would then report that to the team who was actually drafting the language that would accompany the judgment, or that would become the judgment of the judges, because the judges did not write the judgments. My team wrote all of the judgments. The judges would review the judgments that we drafted. They might modify it in some respect, or they might ask for assistance specifically in drafting a dissent. But the judgments themselves were actually drafted by me, by my teams, and the teams that I supervised. I had the Milutinovich et al. Case, which was delivered in English. I had the Perlich et al. Case, which was delivered in French. I had the Shechel case, which was eventually delivered in French, but not by me, because I had left the tribunal before the Shechel judgment was issued. And then I was also responsible for the pretrial in 5 other chambers, 4 of which were done in English and 1 was in French. I supervised about 40 staff when I was in chambers, not including the interns. And I supervised the intern program at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, which had about 200 folks in it, rotating about every 3 to 6 months with new interns who came in. When I went to the position as the chief of court management, I was responsible as the evidence custodian for the 161 cases that we managed, and I was responsible for the indexing delivery in 3 different languages, English, French, and Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and the ability to retrieve, and having systems in place that enabled us to do that, and helping to devise those systems and keep them current, including computer skills. And then when I went to the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, we worked in English, French, and Arabic. And again, I was the chief of court management with a staff of about 13 to 15 people that I was responsible for, that provided the support in court for the indictment, or for the trial of the 5 indicted Hezbollah whose judgment was recently issued, and only 1 of them was convicted in that court. So that's kind of a bit of the background. Now, you already saw I didn't mean to start with the picture of the Pope, but it later, and I'll go ahead and reshare my screen for a minute. If I can do that real quick. And I am going to try to answer your questions in the time that you have available. Okay, that's Rungari Forest. Here I am meeting the Pope. And how did that come about? Well, because of my active engagement in international human rights, in the works at the tribunal, my 30 years on active duty with the United States Air Force, I became very involved with domestic concerns with respect to individuals who were victims of sexual assault, individuals who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, individuals who suffer from traumatic brain injury, and those individuals who become engaged in the criminal justice system. I've been very involved with tribal courts and in addressing issues related to restorative justice, which tie very closely to some of the civil and human rights issues that I've talked about. And I was invited to go to speak at the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences on restorative justice and ways to address homelessness, drug addiction, and poverty among veteran populations through the use of restorative courts. And so whether your interest lies in working internationally abroad, or whether working domestically in the field of civil and human rights, there are opportunities everywhere. I want to just give you a couple of quick thoughts about, or quick pieces of information about working in the international arena. One of the things I found out when I went to work at the Yugoslavia Tribunal is that I had no clue, I had zero understanding of how the United Nations system worked. And the United Nations system is mirrored by many of the other international organizations. So I thought just spending a few minutes explaining to you what position titles mean might help you when you're doing your searches for opportunities that may be of specific interest for you. So a P1 or professional level 1 is an entry-level post for individuals who are seeking employment with the United Nations. P1 is an entry-level position. That generally means that the individual who is applying has 0 to 2 years of experience. There are very few P1 positions, very few P1 positions in the United Nations system, as well as in other systems. And what they want is people who arrive at the P2 and above level. P2 is 2 to 5 years of relevant experience. And so the question that I got routinely from individuals who look to me to be a mentor to help them find opportunities that were consistent with their goals, their interests, and their skills is, how do you get that 2 years of relevant experience? And you have to get it through a number of different ways. One is, if you serve an internship with the United Nations, whether in New York or abroad, let me tell you first, those internships are generally unpaid. It is very rare that you qualify to be paid as an intern for the United Nations. There are other non-governmental organizations that will give you equivalent experience and do pay for their interns. One of the things that I was able to work with some of our, particularly our US-based students who didn't have funding for internships, is sometimes you can work with your university to see if they will give you course credit for a period of internship, which may help because you may be able to use federally grant-funded course coverage for the period of time if you're able to get course credit for the internship that you do. And all of the institutions with which I worked offered the opportunity to qualify for course credit, including providing required, the supervisor, and I was usually the supervisor, but not always, providing the necessary grading requirements or whatever it was that was necessary from the university to give you an externship course credit to qualify you to at least use some of your federal grant funding to be able to help underwrite the cost of that internship if you were able to do that. Just because you got grant funding and you got the school to say yes doesn't mean that you will get one of the internship slots. They are highly competitive as well. To give you an idea, when I hired probably 100 folks, maybe more, when I was working for the United Nations over a period of 8 years in the various roles that I had. It was not uncommon, at least at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, for me to have as many as 200 people apply for any one opening that I had available. That's not to discourage you. That's to say, if you qualify, then you should apply, but don't be disappointed if the first time you apply, the answer is no. Remember, I applied for 7 years and never got a single offer. And you know my language skills, and you know I served 30 years on active duty, deployed 5 times, worked in international law, and was a human rights fellow. In 7 years, I never got a call back. Now, part of that was because I didn't understand the grade structure, and I was applying for jobs that I was either overqualified or underqualified for, which is why I've taken your time today to explain it. So P2 is 2 to 5 years of relevant experience. P3 is 5 to 7 years of relevant experience. P4 is 7 to 10 years of relevant experience. And P5 is 10 years or more. When you start seeing positions that have a D or delta behind it, that is a directorate position. It's a very senior level, and you're probably not looking at that until you're later in your career at the 10 or 15-year mark. And I did serve as a D1 for 4.5 months at the Yugoslavia Tribunal in the role as acting deputy registrar. If you know those P-level positions, that will help you target your search, because when you go to UN.org or any of the other sites that I'm going to tell you about before we leave today, you're going to want to look at that P1, P2 level, given, unless some of you come with a great deal more experience than I would anticipate a law student might have. And sometimes that is the case. The other thing that I have told folks to not be afraid of is, don't be afraid of also looking at field service positions, which puts you in the field, and don't always look in just the legal service category. Look at being a UN human rights observer. Look at, and I can look at being a public affairs officer. Look at other opportunities that enable you to get into the field, to get that 2 to 5 years of relevant experience that make you a very viable candidate to be able to get into one of the professional level positions later in your career. The other thing that I have told folks, and I have had great success with, is getting folks into the general service level positions. General service is not a professional service level position. It does not require that you have a law degree, but when you have a law degree and you apply to a general service level position, first of all, you need to know they are very well compensated. For some of my colleagues who did not have 2 to 5 years of experience, I was able to get them placed in positions that were general service 5 positions, which paid around 60,000 euro a year. That's a good paying job, and it gets you 2 to 5 years of experience, relevant experience, which then you may have to move to a new institution to go from the general service to the professional service. So it may be that you can't go from a general service position in your specific institution. You might have to leave that institution and go to another institution, but you can then apply at the professional level, because why? You got your general service 2 years of relevant experience, and now you qualify for the 2 to 5 year P2 positions, which there are many. For those of you who have been told, oh, the International Criminal Court is the place to be, as you may know, the United States is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. I don't see that happening. Even if Joe Biden gets elected, I don't see that happening. I may be wrong. My crystal ball is not always entirely clear, but it didn't happen under the Obama administration with Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State, so I don't see it happening in a Biden administration either, but that's just my view. There are some fundamental flaws in the international criminal justice system, which I'd be happy to talk about at some future time, but not in the limited time that we have today. But I will say that it is possible for US passport holders who are not dual passported to actually get jobs at the International Criminal Court. But you have to be more qualified than any Rome Statute signatory candidate for the position. I've had people who I hired who worked for me, and in particular one that graduated from the same fellowship program from which I graduated when I was a law student at the University of Cincinnati, where I got my law degree. She worked for me first as an intern. Then I was so impressed with her, I hired her in a general service capacity. Then she was able to get herself hired in a professional service capacity after her 2 to 5 years of relevant experience was achieved. And she then was hired as the, no kidding, best qualified at the International Criminal Court, which she has just left to accept a position at the US Holocaust Museum in Washington, DC. So the ICC is a possibility, but it is a limited possibility for those who hold only a US passport. Now, let me tell you a couple of things about searching for jobs. I've told you about the grade structure, and it pretty much correlates whether you're looking at jobs from the OSCE, whether you're looking at jobs from the European Union, whether you're looking at jobs from the UN, whether you're looking at jobs from the International Committee of the Red Cross. That P1 to P5 structure is pretty much going to stay the same. And so you can use that as kind of your guide as you're searching for opportunities. You might go to UN.org and you say, well, I think I'd really like to work at the International Residual mechanism for criminal tribunals, which is what the Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals are now called because they've combined to do their residual functions under one umbrella. And that was to reduce overhead and staff capacity, those sorts of things. So you go to un.org and you say, well, I know there's jobs out there, but none of them are listed here. And that's because they're not consolidated in one place. And so I'm going to give you, this is where you pull out your pencil and your piece of paper and you're going to write these down because these are important places for you to start looking when you're ready to start your search. So un.org is one, and they don't make it easy to find jobs. Just they change it from time to time. So if I gave you the exact way to do it today, it wouldn't necessarily be the same tomorrow. Just keep looking for vacancies or jobs. And of course, for those of you who are primary English speakers, you want to look in the English version, but they also have it in multiple languages if you're a primary speaker of another language. You're also going to want to look at S as in Sam, T as in Tango, L as in Lima, dash, T as in Tango, S as in Sierra, L as in Lima.org, stltsl.org. That's where the jobs for the Lebanon Tribunal are posted. They're not going to be found in un.org. They're not going to be found in un.org. You're going to want to look separately at the Specialist Tribunal for Kosovo. Also, jobs at that Specialist Tribunal for Kosovo are not found at un.org. And you may be saying, well, why aren't they all in un.org? Well, it's because of the funding that supports those institutions and whether they are mandated as a specific UN court. Some are and some are not. And so you have to know all of those different contacts to be able to start looking for your opportunities. Additionally, you want to go to ICJ, the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice is the building that everyone sees that is identified as The Hague. That's not the building I ever worked in. I went there many, many times. I have friends who work there. I have people who used to work for me who work there. I have a judge that I once worked for who works there. That's sort of the Mecca. That's sort of the shrine. To find their jobs, you go to icj-cji.org. They're not on un.org. What they do is very different than the criminal trial work that I did at the Yugoslavia and Lebanon tribunals. The ICJ is more focused on nation-to-nation resolution of disputes. Nation-to-nation resolution of disputes. So issues regarding fishing rights and international waters resolution. Issues related to whether or not there was a genocide not specifically tied to criminal liability of a particular perpetrator may be heard at the International Court of Justice. They have internships, they have jobs. The jobs that you have at the ICJ, if you do not currently have a second language, start studying French and start studying French tomorrow. Because they really need someone who has the ability to work bilingually in English and French at the ICJ. Another place that you can look for opportunities, depending on what your interest is, if you're interested primarily in business law, arbitration, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and again, their jobs are not at un.org. I would suggest the best way to get to them is just Google on Permanent Court of Arbitration. And also look at, again, Google on the Private International Law Commission. Their website is actually hcch.pch.org, but I just Google on Private International Law Commission. What do? For those of you who are interested in family law, domestic law, you're interested in child abduction, that's the organization that actually addresses things like the Hague Convention on Child Custody and the Hague Convention on Probate and the Hague Conventions on all of the different things that there are Hague Conventions on that address private law disputes or private law issues. They do a very different thing than what I did at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, a very different thing than I did at the Lebanon Tribunal, and a very different thing than what I did in my work in international and civil and human rights. So again, another area of interest that may pique some of you or be of interest to some of you. I've been going about 40 minutes. I know folks have to get back to class or have other commitments. So what I'd like to do, Deanna, if I could, is just open it up to see if folks have any questions and to see if I can provide any service in answering those.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much for your presentation and all the advice and information. I'm sure it's very helpful. I've written down, I've taken notes, so I'm willing to put all this into practice. So we'll open the floor up for a Q&A. Yes. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to speak up. Not, I have one question myself.
Okay, go ahead.
But just they mentioned for each of the levels, the professional levels, a relevant experience. So relevant meaning to the work, the sort of what the summary a job summary is, or what does relevant mean?
And that's a great question. And the answer is it kind of depends. That's a good legal answer, right? So what relevant experience may mean may be defined by what the job is that you're applying for. So if you're, for example, looking for a general service opportunity, as I've suggested, then it may be that you can qualify for relevant experience by having been a personal assistant or a research assistant, or that some of your law school experience doing research work may be very helpful. If you're seeking experience as a professional level at P1, P2, they're going to be looking to see, have you drafted something? Did you work for a judge? Have you been working, if you've got legal writing in a judicial setting, that may even though it's not international in nature, if you've got a law clerk position, for example, when you graduated and you spent a year clerking for a judge, or if you did an externship with a judge, that may qualify as well. If you do an internship with the UN, your internship time ordinarily only qualifies at 50%. And so that means that if you did a 6-month internship, you get 3 months of relevant experience credit, but it does not it does not qualify one for one. So it really does require. It depends on the job that you're actually applying for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions? I guess another thing is if there's one thing you could tell us to do during law school still that would prepare us. I mean, besides, of course, internships during the summer, is there anything else? Learning a language probably, you would say, should benefit us. But for the work ahead.
Yeah, I can tell you that there is having a language skill is vital, and it was a tiebreaker, routinely a tiebreaker. If two candidates looked equally qualified on the left and the right, hand. If one had a language skill and the other did not, then more often than not, we were going to wind up taking the one that had the language skill. Some of the teams that I had work for me, some of the folks on the teams that I had work for me were fluent in as many as 6 languages, 6, which was shocking to me. And they are always looking for people with language skills, always looking for people with language skills. So if you don't have a second language skill, that's just so you know. So I had a lot of language background, but I was not fluent in anything other than English and Spanish, and they didn't need my Spanish in what I was doing. So you can pick up the language skill, and they actually offer free courses in the languages that they are working in. So there were free Arabic courses when I was at the Lebanon Tribunal. There were free French courses, both at the Lebanon and the Yugoslavia Tribunal. Avail yourself of them if you have the opportunity to do that, but a language skill can be a real tiebreaker. I would say the other thing that you can do while you're still in law school is write and publish, and write well and publish. I had a young woman who she had Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian language skill, but English was her primary language. She was from New Zealand. And the reason that her judge advanced her efforts to stay at the Yugoslavia Tribunal was because of a very, very well-written article that she had done while she was a law student addressing the conflict in the Balkans. And that drew his attention to her as a skilled writer. And so if you're able to write something, publish something, collaborate with someone on something to be published on an area that's in conflict, that can actually draw attention to you as well and be a tiebreaker. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's the other thing I would recommend.
Yeah, of course. And I guess I would just use this moment as a way to plug the International Law and Human Rights Journal. That's a very nascent journal that we have at Rutgers, but it's growing. And so we have a speakers series as well as part of that journal. And so students who are 1Ls and have joined us today, you're very welcome to look into that journal. I'm a member and I can also speak to if you have any questions. So 2Ls can join that, and you can write a note. So that's a way to gain writing experience. If anyone else has any questions? If not, you can feel free to send them to ILS to ILS, the email from which we sent information for this panel. We'll then send your question to Colonel Murnane and we'll get back to you. Just a reminder, if you want to go back to any of the advice or experiences that Colonel Murnane has shared with us today, this video will be up on YouTube quite soon, so you can go back and look. And yeah, so we'd like to thank you for everyone joining us today, and of course to Colonel Murnane for talking about her great life experiences and as a judge and traveling. I'm sure that's all what we want to do, and especially now when we have stayed 6 months at our house, all we want to do is travel and see other places. So we're very grateful for sharing with us everything, and yes, I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, Deanna. Can I just mention, so I lived 3 years in Japan, 6 years in Germany, 8 years in the Netherlands. I worked in Africa, all over Africa, and in South America. So if there's somebody that's got a specific regional interest that they would like to talk about, just have them drop me a note. You've got my email, you know how to reach me. And as I shared at the beginning, Deanna and I met through her involvement with the International Law section. I guarantee you that if you're interested in international law, there's something in the international law section that will appeal to whatever it is that you're interested in doing. If you're interested in business law, if you're interested in corporate law, if you're interested in anti-corruption work, if you're interested in human rights work, you will find a home in the international law section, I guarantee it. Your membership, as long as you're a law student, is free, and you can join up to 5 sections, divisions, or forums. Give us a try. I will tell you that I have at least 6 people that I have hired with whom my only connection was that I met them through work they were doing with the ABA International Law Section, and I was so impressed with what they did that I found a way to bring them to work for me at the UN. And so I would encourage those of you who feel that the ABA is a place that might appeal to your international law interests as well to consider that. So in any
Yeah,
event.
no, there are sections part of the ABA that also publish. They have newsletters. So if you want to write for that as well, that's another outlet. Do you mind if I put your email in the chat?
No, that's fine. You have it, right? Or you want me to
Yeah,
put?
I have it. I'll just put it in the chat
Yeah,
here. So for those who have who are still with us on this panel, so you can see the email I posted, and you can send questions directly to Colonel Murnane, or you can send them to ILS, and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful Tuesday and rest of the week. And thank you to Colonel Murnane.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right,
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Colonel. I just had to say I'm an evening student and currently